Hey friends, Marley here from Wild by Nature. I'm sitting in a beautiful spot at a place called Waingut Lodge, which is one of the locations that we get to run some of our programs. It's on the edge of the Barringtons. We've got the Chichester Dam, a water source for all of the hunter, just up the river here. It's got beautiful creeks running down there and some amazing birds flying around, and also some curious creatures, particularly at night time. Last night or early this morning, my partner and I were woken up and kept awake by lots of activity out our window, and it links quite nicely to this week because we weren't quite sure what they are. It was too dark to see, but they did leave some remains in the morning. So this week we're moving to the north, the energy of the north, and we're going to look at a bundle that's wrapped in the north and some ideas around tracking, around mentoring, and how it all fits in the village picture, and also get a bit more of a sense of how the web works through unity. So thanks for joining us. For those who missed, or just a recap, in week 1 we were looking at the east, and we were looking at the energy of birth, sunrise, and the innocence and wonder and joy, and the way a newborn or infant child experiences the world. And we took that out to try and find a sit spot or a place to be and just let the senses open up and experience what they experience, and introduce the idea of catching a story. And then we moved to the northeast in childhood, where we started to build and move and motivate that energy and experience the curiosity and also the vitality of a child. And hopefully we took that out into the world with our animal body, exploring some of the other animals. That's one of our little village member animals there. Elio, we've been hanging out with him the last few weeks. He's been an excellent mentor for us. And yeah, a great reminder of that. Although we might be trying to mentor the younger ones are always teaching us too. So let's move to the north this week and have a look at how that fits into the web that we're exploring. So the north is the middle of the day. The north is the sun right up in the middle of the sky. It's a period of the day that for a lot of us we're starting to feel the heat, that our energy is not so excited and moving as it was. It's starting to slow, it's starting to focus, but we might still have a job to do. So in traditional times we might be tracking our food, or trying to find our day's treasure, or finish the shelter. And our bodies might be telling us that we don't really want to necessarily work so hard, but we have to do it. So how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to explore that a little bit. In the north we also have one of the most important core routines, which is the idea of tracking, or holistic tracking. And holistic tracking is something that we're all doing in some way in our lives. We've been trackers since time immemorable, and we've never lost the art. So we're going to look at how tracking deepens our senses and see where that meets with the energy of the north and the idea of mentoring. So it's also a period in life in the north that we might think of as adolescence. And with adolescence there's some energies there too. And a big part of adolescence in connected culture is an idea of commitment. Commitment to one's own purpose, but also beginning to feel a commitment to one's village and one's earth. And that's been a really poignant theme this week in my life and the world, I think, for those who witnessed the climate strike stuff. So let's see if we can weave this all together. And maybe we'll go back to the story that we left and we missed last week. So if you remember the story, we had Markandeya, the first of the humans born on the earth, dreamed up by Vishnu, the great creator. And in that dream he was born into the world like a child full of wonder. Everything was new. Everything was magical. Everything could be touched, tasted, smelt, felt with this luminosity, the happiness of a child who's just welcomed into an earth, like a Garden of Eden. And let's imagine that Markandeya has begun to grow, begin to move, and he started to interact with the animals. And as he's got older, he started to realize that it is not just me as part of all, but there is a duality. So there's a bit of a separation, and in duality I can interact more. So he began to interact with the animals, and they began to teach him their ways. And as he did that, he made friends, he made community, and he began to learn and grow rapidly. And still he felt like he was in a bit of a Garden of Eden. Life was good. And this is where I'm going to tweak the myth a little bit, because stories travel and they need to make sense. So let's imagine Markandeya reached a point of adolescence where he started to grow strong and skillful in his world. And I can imagine that since this is a Hindu story, that perhaps he was a vegetarian until this day. But in this story, I'm going to imagine that Markandeya perhaps broke one of the early sacred rules, as has happened in other myths. And in a yearning to test his skill as a human and the first hunter, he took one of his animal friends to eat it. And he made fire and he ate it. And the fire began to grow and create smoke. And the smoke began to rise up into the dream of Vishnu, and it got into his nostrils, and this is where the myth goes back to the original. And with a great achoo and a whole bunch of snot, he spat or sneezed Markandeya out. Now if we remember, Vishnu was floating on the sea of abyss, so if Markandeya gets sneezed out of the earth creation, then he's going to end up in that great sea of abyss. And when he landed in it, it was cold, it was dark. In fact, we might say this was his fall. And in that coldness and darkness, he began to feel for the first time the fears, the anxiety. Death began to make its way into his mind, something he had been ignorant of in his early years. Death and fear are powerful things. In fact, it may be said that they are the drivers for all the challenges in our world, externally and internally. Overcoming fear and overcoming death takes courage, it takes commitment, and it takes trust. But I can imagine that Markandeya in that great sea of abyss, although it was pulling him down almost like a great kraken that had grabbed his legs with its great tentacles, would have remembered the beauty, the love, the joy of being part of his community in the earth. And he had not given up. So he'd kicked off those tentacles, he'd rose to the top, and when he reached the top, he looked to the distance, and in the distance he noticed something, a light. And in the story it said it is a green light, a glowing light. I heard it perhaps had the body of a woman. Nonetheless, when Markandeya saw that light, he knew it was his true light, his true north, the direction he must go towards. And although it seemed an endless distance away, far on the horizon, he did the only thing he could. He began to swim, stroke by stroke by stroke. For what else can we do in that place? And so that takes us back to the energy of the north. When we reach the north, we have to draw forth on all that has reminded us of the beauty outside and inwards, so that we can commit to the job that needs doing. If we need to bring something home to our village, we'll do it. We'll do whatever it takes. Now, in some ways, the West has taken this energy, this idea of we must work to serve, too strongly. And so we have pushed ourselves, and some say we are stuck in the north, always in the north, until we come home and then we crash and then we're up and we're back in the north again. I've experienced it. I've chosen to step out of it. And I imagine for many of you, you would have a little bit of an inkling of the same thing. But we can get caught in the north. Society likes it because north is productive. But in traditional cultures, it is said, and I've seen it in Arnhem Land, that they are very efficient in the way they move in the north. In the heat of the day, if there's a job to be done, they do it. Not by expelling energy or pushing and pushing, but by moving mindfully. They maintain an inquisitive focus, still aware, but it's a relaxed focus, a relaxed commitment to get the job done. Now, the other side of commitment that we might see at this stage of life, or at this direction, or in the web here, is the idea of mentoring. For those of us who've come through some sense of connected village culture, whether our whole lives or more at a more recent time, we might have started to get a sense that we are being looked after. First by our mothers or fathers, whichever figures take that place, by our community, or by our land and our more than human community. And when we start to feel a sense of gratitude that we've been looked after and raised, then of course there starts to come a commitment or a desire to pay it back. Now, I'm not saying that at this age that it's now time to switch and to become fully of service. In fact, on the web we'll see that comes a few directions later. But the commitment to mentoring begins. And if we're going to commit to mentoring, then we're going to commit to drawing forth and helping support others on the journey that we've been on. And the beauty of that, from my perspective, is that we don't have to be reached elderhood to be a mentor. We just need to be a few steps ahead. A few steps ahead. And the same goes for this nature connection game. See, I'm no expert in nature connection practices. I've just done a little bit of learning for a couple of years. But I'm hoping to share that. And so as I share it, I grow. And I'm hoping that I can mentor others and help support them in their journey. And it is said that one of the best ways, or the best way to mentor, is not necessarily to teach or preach. Perhaps I'm a little bit lecturing in this series, but let's imagine that we're working with a human that we care for and we want to see bring out the best in them, bring them into a place of nature connection. Well, first we go through the experiences ourselves and start to build it in us. And then we start to catch other people's stories. And when we catch their stories, whether they're our kids, our friends, a group we work with, then we can start to drill down a bit. This is where the art of tracking comes in. Because in the art of tracking, we want to ask questions so that we can get deeper and deeper. And we might start with some service level questions. So if someone comes to us with a story about an experience they had in nature, about something they saw, we might ask them more to open up their senses. What colours did you see? Where was it? How big was it? What was the length of this part? What was the size of that part? How did it move? We'll start to get a sense of that being or of that thing that they witnessed and get them to drill deeper into their mind to remember. Then we might take them a little further, not just what they saw, but when did they see it? What time of day was it? What was the weather doing? Did it happen just once? Or will it happen again? Has it happened a number of times? And they start to get a sense of the power of the timing. Power of timing. And when we get to tracks, we'll look at that a little bit more. Might say, where was it? And when we think about the where, there's a few things we could think. Where was it in the ecology, in a place, so that it made sense? And perhaps where it might live or where it might be now. We might ask them about why. Why is a powerful question. Why do you think? And here's when we can start to draw them beyond what was actually physical to working with their imagination and to really thinking about a situation. So I wonder why. I wonder why it was sitting on that branch of the tree at that time of day when the farmer over there or the cow over there was tilling up the soil. Simple one. I wonder why when that bird sound, when that sound you heard before happened, that it moved to another part of the forest. I wonder why you saw it yesterday, not the day before, but the day before that. These questions might not be answered straight away, but it's starting to get people to think deeper and deeper. And so wondering is a powerful thing. But the most valuable thing when we're catching stories, whether it's about an experience in nature or not, is not sticking to a strict structure or a strict structure of questioning, like we've got a little list in front of us, but that we're genuinely curious, because it's together as an exploration and we can start to drill down. And by doing that, we're taking a mentor's mind state, one of genuine curiosity, but also the desire to draw out more. And that same mind state and that same curiosity can be taken to stories about internal nature. If we hear a story about a person's experience and we want to go down deeper and understand how they felt emotionally or psychologically, or how that affected them, so that they start to discover more about the external world and their internal world, because it's where the two meet that they start to discover the power of their authentic individual self and their place in the world, and where the two combine, that's when they're growing into this flower that becomes a fruit that then serves their community. And mentoring is a tool, and that was found in, let's say, nearly all research-connected communities, possibly, from what I've heard and from what I've seen. And it's a different way of educating. It's not the modern way of teaching. Sometimes it's done in a very sneaky way. And it takes a craftiness. In the Eight Shields, they talk about coyote mentoring because the coyote is a trickster and lures people just beyond their edges, taking them beyond their edges deeper and deeper. And that tool, and if we were born into a culture, into a connected village, once upon a time we might have expected to meet with 20, 30, 40, 50 mentors, older and elders, who had been actively taking a part in our life, who were genuinely interested in our life, wanting to draw us into our most whole, our most connected being. For two reasons. One is they would have experienced it themselves, and two, they know that that is what their village and their earth needs. So if we are taking mentoring roles in others' lives, or even in our own life, then we're taking a genuine interest in supporting them and us. Win-win situation. Win-win. And from a teacher's standpoint, I've started to realize more and more the power of having this approach to education. Not one of coercion or deciding what others need, but just of letting them follow their path, letting them follow their interests, letting them find their treasures, letting them find their stories and adventures, and just helping guide them along the way. And maybe they'll take an interest in something, a skill. It could be a nature connection skill like making fire, or tracking, or weaving, or cordage, or storytelling, or movement. There's the plethora of skills that sit in the core routines, but we just want to help them draw that out and deepen their learning. That's the idea of mentoring. That's the idea of mentoring, and it sits here in the north. And I want to take us a little deeper into that web from a whole village perspective, because we've been looking at the directions on their own for the last 2 and now 3rd week. And although they can make sense on their own, it is when we see the whole picture that it's the most powerful. So if we take a village approach to nature connection, a village approach, then we're going to start to see a couple of important things. One is the power of opposites on the wheel, or on the web, or the spiral. And so that if we see a newborn on birth, on the other side, it's met the direction of the west. The direction of the west is like that adulthood, the primary caregivers, the one who are providing food, shelter, nurturance, protection for their children, for their newborns. And they're needed in that world more than any of the other directions. Then when they move into childhood, and they're starting to move and play and not need as much primary caregiver attention, you might see that all the aunties and uncles of the southwest are starting to take more of a role. And although they might be going out on adventures with other kids and teenagers, it's these ones that will be catching their stories and starting to watch them and see their interests, see their skills, send them on errands, help them grow into their animal bodies and curiosity and senses and connection. And then we might get to a point of adolescence. And I think that in our modern society, this one is the most poorly met, and there's I think an obvious reason for that is we see at the other end of that, of the north is the south, is their elderhood. Now, at least in my own life and my friends, when I've grown up, I've seen that it's very difficult for parents to hold the energy of a teen. And in a lot of traditional cultures, there was this rites of passage or separation from the family, where the teens were stepping into exploring themselves more authentically in a more adult world as they go through their rites of passage and start to go out beyond the village. It's a time where can be emotional turmoil and big challenges, right? And so the power of having elders watching over and guiding that journey is that the elders have, ideally, if they're an elder, not an older but an elder, they've reached a sense, let's say, of having less ego. They're less involved, they're less reactive. And so they remember what it was like, or they understand what it's like for a teenager to go through what they go through. And so the elders are able to hold that turmoil and that journey, that period when they end up in that great sea of abyss, and things start to experiment not only with the wilder side of emotional, sexual, relational life, but also with with the internal. So not only with the external wildness, but the internal wildness of the emotions and starting to drill deeper into who they are. So the elders are able to hold that. Now, if we don't have that connection, it makes it very challenging for these adolescents. And so we have other people in the village who are really trying to hold that. But I think we can see that it's a problem sometimes. So that's one of the really important reasons of reconnecting the webs. And next week we'll go to the northwest and we'll see how the sages of the southeast are holding this very deep spiritual journey. But for now, it's much more of an earthly who am I journey in the greater social world, not just restricted to the family. Using the passion, focus, the determination, the commitment of those teens and drawing it out as mentors and as they become mentors. Or if not the teens in the real world, the teens in us, that energy that still burns. And I saw that really wonderfully this week in the climate strikes with those teenagers leading it. They were genuinely committed to the cause. And I could see them as a group. There was a social identity they were part of as a whole as they gave their energy and commitment to that cause. Here comes Dan, keeper of the lodge. So I'm going to finish off this week with a couple of home play practices, and they're going to be based a little bit around tracking. So I'm going to take us on the move a little bit. I'll give my camera skills. In the environments we live, whether we're out here in the bush or we're in an urban setting, everywhere we go, our senses can be picking up on tracks and trails left behind, or we might be tracking something, whether it's the smell of a food we would like to eat, whether it's the sound of a friend or someone's calling our name, whether we're reading letters on a page. These are all forms of tracking, but we can also do nature-based tracking. Because everywhere we are, there's some sign of animals, and especially animals like the mammals who are out busy at night. If we look around, if we keep our senses open, then we might start to discover that they're leaving trails behind. And those trails are like the original books that we can start to learn to read. I'm not an expert on tracking, but I do enjoy spending a bit of time with it. So the first take-home activity is to go out into nature and tune back into that mind that is like a child, switching on all our senses just in openness. And then even getting into our animal bodies, because if we're going to follow the animals, then we want ourselves to start to feel the ability to move like them. It's one way that we might connect to them. We start to listen, and we watch, soft eyes. And even if it's in a park or our backyard, surely there's going to be some signs left behind. Surely there's going to be some signs left behind. So what do we have here in this place last night where all the activity was happening? Is it a footprint or a dig? I wonder. Have a look around. In this environment, what sort of animals might be here? I know there were some mammals, and I know they were hopping. A toe print. Not a big one. Perhaps they left behind some scat. Yes, here we go. Perfect. Now, if we look down here, and it's not always good to touch, we'll notice that they've left behind some scat. Now, track's a tricky business to figure out. It's a journey. Maybe it's worth taking, but scats are a lot of fun. When we notice a scat, there's some simple questions we can start to ask to get a sense of what animal might have left. The first one I like to think about is, was it a carnivore or a herbivore? And on this one I'm looking and I'm seeing there's evidence of grass, and mainly grass. If it was a carnivore, well, we're going to possibly see some bones, some fur, and that will give us an idea. Okay, so we're looking at a herbivore. And then I see the size of it. Now I can compare it to my own size, to my own poo, and think, well, or maybe a dog or some animal we're familiar with, and think, if that's the size of one of the pellets, then how big is the animal? It's pretty little. So I'm imagining it's a relatively small mammal, but it's definitely bigger than a mouse. Probably bigger than a bandicoot, and they eat, they're carnivores anyway. So in this area, it would make sense it's a type of macropod. A macropod in here at some point left a scat. Now it looks a bit old, or a bit dry, so it probably wasn't here last night. So it may or may not have been one of the creatures we heard last night. But I wonder if there's more around. Just up from here I saw some larger pieces of scat that reminded me more of the size of a wallaby or a roo. So this one's definitely smaller. And when I was listening last night and tracking the sounds of it, I heard them thumping at a faster rate, moving than I would usually hear a wallaby or a roo. So I'm thinking it's a smaller mammal than a wallaby or a roo. It seems to be digging a lot around here too, although bandicoots do as well. So we can keep following that trail and keep looking around and keep digging deeper into something that's been left behind by an animal. Ideally, something in our local park or near our sit spot where we can use the ecology to help us know what animals are around there, when they might have been there, and ideally with a friend as well, because the art of questioning together deepens that too. So that's activity number one, is to go out and start some tracking. As we walk, I'm just going to keep my eyes on the ground, pause and look around, and perhaps I'll notice some nice tracks. Now the second home play activity is related more to our sit spot again, so it's less of a moving activity as a sitting tracking, because the most powerful or the most informative thing that we might track in any natural environment are the birds. The birds are always there, and the birds are always speaking to us the message of the forest. And we can tell a lot. I mean, bird language is a huge topic to explore, but it's a great place, but it's always worth starting. And a great way to start is just to tune into the bird sound that we hear in a particular place at a particular time. Now let's understand that anything that goes into nature is going to send out a disturbance, like a ring in a pond, and it's going to affect the birds. So if we're going to find a spot to sit and we're the only thing there and they're not used to us, then it might take some time for them to calm down. But if they do, they might reach a baseline state where they're chattering to each other, maybe they're flying here and there depending on the time of day, and they'll reach this baseline sound. And if we can get to that place, it's great, because then we're going to start to hear disturbances from other sources, particularly alarms. So as a great beginner's place to start is to tune into the sounds of one of the birds that are in our local area. Listen to it, try to understand when it's just chattering, keeping a baseline, contact calls, and then notice when they start to really chirp up or make a loud sound, or a sound that you can feel is an alarm. And then become aware of what's happening. Maybe the disturbance is another human or a dog, maybe it's a predator in the sky, maybe there's a predator on the ground. I've come across owls, snakes, goannas, and other birds of prey when I've heard it and followed an alarm sound. And this can happen even in the city. Trickier, but it's possible. So the second home play activity is to start tracking the birds. Start to develop a relationship with the language of the birds, because they're the speakers of the land, they're the messengers of the land. And the third and final home play activity this week is about tracking humans. So it's more of an internal tracking. So I'm just going to keep walking here, still looking. Sunset. Oh, wait, you've got to see this. Can you see that sunset behind? Forget the towers, maybe not. So the internal tracking, or the tracking of a human, is a good place to start is ourself. And that's just to start to notice our behaviours and to notice the things that are affecting us through a day. And maybe to ask a few more questions about how that's making us feel when it's bringing us out of connection, and what's happening when I'm coming into connection. So getting to know how our body feels when I'm connected, getting to know my mind state, and trying to drill a bit deeper over what's happening at that time, when, what time of day, what am I doing, who's around me, and how do these different things affect my mind state. So start to track our own body in relation to what we're doing, in particular to how it feels when I have my nature experience. And the other side of the human tracking home play is to be in connection with another person who has some sense of curiosity or adventuring in nature, and start to listen and catch their stories and to ask questions of genuine curiosity. Really give them a space to speak, but then draw forth, like try and get more detail, bring out the storyteller in them. Bring out the storyteller in them, because if people can share their stories, it deepens their experience. And that's how we're going to get really magnify nature connection. And of course, sharing your own stories. So as a final thing, I really encourage people, if they can, to go onto the Facebook page and join the group. We've only had a couple of stories shared so far, but the more stories we share, the better. And if you see a story, then start to ask questions to draw out more about that experience. That would be great. And if not online, if you can do it in person, even better. So find people to share with and really start to develop the art of questioning, which is in a way an art of mentoring, and such a powerful tool in creating reconnection, village connection in this web. And I think that if we can do that together, then we might just really start to shift the way our community, at least close community, interacts with, looks after and connects with nature. So track well, have a great journey. Thanks for joining me this week, and I'll see you again for our final week next week in the Northwest. Very gentle energy there. You'll like it.